Now we are ready to set up this particular detail. So if I go back into model space, again, I don't need to put a whole lot of information in here for that, because again, I'm going to have a blow up of this area and I'm going to have a blow up of this area. Typically, these enlarged sections, we just need to explain what's not in the enlarged one. I need to create a couple more layers because again, I'm going to do an enlarged of this area and an enlarged of this area. So I need to create some more of these. So I'm going to go to my detail mark and I'm going to create a new one, and I'm going to call it S-detail mark, and this time I'm going to put eave strut. Then I'm going to go ahead and create another one, and I'm going to put in S-detail footing detail. Then again, I've got to create the rectangle piece for that also. So again, I'm going to mark them similarly. I'm going to create a new one, and I am going to call it S-detail rect for rect eave strut. And then I'm going to create another new one called S-detail rect footing detail. So let's start with the eave strut. Let's make that our current. And I want the ones that have the hidden lines. So I'm going to start here, set that as my current. And I'm going to come in here again and I'm going to draw a rectangle. But before I do that, I need to look and see what scale that this is going to be at. So my eave strut detail needs to be at 1.5 inch equals a foot. So I'm going to go ahead and change my scale at this point to 1.5 inch equals a foot. And now I'm going to draw my rectangle for my eave strut. And I want to be sure and pick up what needs to be in here. So at this point, I'm just going to grab approximately this much because I want to see the roof sheeting, the gutter, the bracket, how the column and the beam come together. So now you'll notice my hidden line is at a completely different scale. And so now I'm going to copy my detail mark. And I'm going to right click on it and go to properties. And I am going to set it to the 1.5 inch equals a foot. And get rid of the 1/4 inch on that one. And you'll see it's much, much smaller. So I'm going to move it a little bit closer to my box that I just drew. And I'm going to draw a line from there to there. And again, I'm going to put this on my eave strut detail mark. Then from there, I'm going to do the same thing for my footing. I need to change my scale to 1 inch equals a foot. And then I'm going to draw in my rectangle. And again, I'm going to copy this down to here. I want to put this on my footing layer, and I want to put this on my detail mark footing layer. I need to change the scale of this by going into my properties and getting rid of the 1.5 and adding 1 inch equals a foot. And I'll need to adjust my line after doing that. So now, if I go back into my sheet, you see I have some additional things on here. And I don't want to see them in this particular viewport. I'm going to double click in here, and again I'm going to go to my layers and pull this where I can kind of see it. And I know my eave strut detail I didn't want on in here, so I'm going to freeze that. And I know my footing I didn't want on in here, so I'm going to freeze that. And my detail marks for my eave strut and for my footing. So now I'm left again with just this. So that's what I want. So now I'm going to go back into my model space. Next, we're going to concentrate on this enlarged one. So if I look at my sheet, I probably could get that one over here, but it's going to be pretty tight. And then all I have left is my eave strut and my footing details. So I think I'm just going to create another sheet and put those details on a different sheet. So to do that, all I have to do is right click and go to move or copy. And I can put move to the end, and I can do create a copy and say OK. So you'll see down here it created another tab, and both of them right now are currently the same thing. So this one I'm going to rename, and I'm going to call it the sheet number, which is S-1. So since this sheet is S-1, this one is going to be S-2. So now I've created my two sheets. So now I'm going to need to go in and change my sheet number to where it's in paper space and not in my block. Because if I change the number here, it's going to change it on the other sheet, and I don't want to do that. So I'm going to double click into, I'm in my S2 sheet, so it doesn't really matter which one I'm in. I'm going to say OK, and I'm going to go in and I'm going to right click and go to clipboard and copy with base point, and I'm going to pick the lower corner of my sheet and I'm going to pick that number. And then I'm actually going to delete it out of here, and I'm going to close the block editor and say save the changes. So now I should be able to come in here and right click and go to clipboard and go to paste and pick this corner, and I have my sheet in there. So on this one now I want to change it to S2. And now I can go to my S1 sheet, and I can do right click and go to clipboard and go to paste and pick this one, and it is set up as S1. So my title block is in pretty good shape. Again, I'm going to go ahead and change the dates because we're on part 2 now. So the date that this is assigned when I go into my title block is 2/8. Next, we'll change the due date to 2/22 because that's when this assignment will be due. And then if we click on Close Block Editor and say Save the Changes, we should be pretty well up to date. So as I said, I need now to do this in large detail. So I'm going to go to my sheet S2, and I'm going to use this viewport. So I'm going to double click in it, and I'm going to unlock it, and I'm going to bring this drawing over to here. And again, I said I wanted the scale of this to be 3/4 of an inch equals a foot. So I'm going to come down here to my annotation scale, and I'm going to change it to 3/4 inch equals a foot. And I'm going to kind of pull it up here to where I can get all of it in there that I want. And then I'm going to double click in here, and I'm going to lock it. Now, I don't want to see this frame in here, this rectangle here. I only want to see these two where I'm going to be doing the enlarged. So I'm going to come in here, and I'm going to go to my layers, and that one was for the rigid frame. So if I come in here and I click on that, you'll see that went away. I don't have to worry about the detail mark because it's outside of my area that I have in my window. The other thing is I don't want this box to come over quite this far, so I'm going to pull it over. I'm going to stretch it over to where I just get enough to get my box in there. So now I have this drawing set up kind of the way that I want it. Now this drawing here, again, we don't need to do too much detailing on it, especially here, because we're going to have this area blown up, we're going to have this area blown up. But a couple of things we do want to do with this. If we look back on page 139, there is a couple of heights that we want to make sure we have on there. So I'm going to go back into my model. I'm going to create a new layer. And remember, we created dims 2 for before. Well, now I want to be a little more specific so I can remember what everything is for. I'm going to go in and I'm going to create S-dims, and I'm going to do partial section. And I'm just going to leave it the color that it is, and I'm going to set it as my current layer. So the biggest thing on here that I need to have dimension, because again, I'll pick up a lot of dimensions here and I'll pick up a lot of dimensions here. But one of the most important dimensions is the B dimension that's on page 139. So I'm going to go to my annotation, and again, I want to make sure I'm in the right scale, which is 3/4 inch equals a foot. And I'm going to use my linear dimension, and I'm going to pick the concrete slab to where the top needs to be. And that should be the 14 feet that we set it up originally. Now the other dimension that would be good to put in here is the girt location, and it said it was to be located at the midpoint. So again, I'm going to pick from the concrete slab, midpoint of the girt, and I'm going to place it, and then I'm going to continue, and I'm going to go ahead and go up here. And you can see I'm off by about 1/4 inch. So I'm going to do my stretch command, and I'm going to pull this down 0.25, and now I have equal 7 and 7. So it's always good to do those dimensions to verify what we need. Sections are typically, we only show vertical heights in sections. When we're doing like building sections, we don't typically do any of the horizontal dimensions. We have that from our grid lines over here on this drawing, so we don't need to do that here. So for this one, this is pretty much the only dimensions that I need on here. But I do need a couple of notes on here, because some of this will show up down here. But one thing that will not show up in any of these details is my girt location. So I'm going to go back into my layers, and I'm going to create another note layer. And again, I had just used notes 1 and 2, so I'm going to create a layer called S-notes, and I'm going to call it partial wall section. And I'm going to set that as my current layer. So I do want to call out my girt, so I'm going to use my annotation, and I'm going to use my multi-leader, and I'm going to pull my note out this direction because I don't want it to interfere with my dimensions. Again, being able to read everything is important. And again, we're going to use capital letters, and I'm going to call this girt. So that pretty much takes care of what I need in my 3/4 inch drawing. So if I go to S2, it looks pretty good. I have my grid bubble up here. I have my enlarged detail here, but it looks like my detail mark is off. So I need to go in here and check and make sure that this is set to the right scale. And it is. It's a 3/4 inch equals a foot. And check this one, and it says it's at 3/4 inch equals a foot, but I always like to go in and delete these other ones out just so I can make sure. And so I need to actually move my line, and actually I'm going to stretch this up. And I'm going to move this line to where it's down here at the bottom. That's a little bit better. And then I'm going to go to this one, and I'm going to move it like that. So now if I go back to my S2 sheet and I zoom out, everything looks really good. So I have 2 dimensions or 3 dimensions on here, and I have my girt labeled. And then I tell them to go look at this to get the details for up here and to go look at this to get the details for down here. That's why I don't need to put any other notes on here. So the next thing I'm going to do is I need to go down here and change my title. And this one is now going to be 1S-2. And it is going to say partial wall section. And we need to change this to say 3/4 inch equals a foot. So now I'm ready to start doing these other two details. So I'm going to use this window here, and I'm going to go in and I'm going to unlock it, and I'm going to go to my blow up of my eave detail. Now it says that it is supposed to be at 1.5 inch equals a foot. So I'm going to change my setting here to 1.5 inch equals a foot. So now I have that. And for now, I'm just going to leave it as it is, but I'm going to go ahead and lock it. And then I'm going to use this window for my footing. So I'm going to go ahead and unlock it. And I'm going to zoom in on my footing. And my footing detail is supposed to be at 1 inch equals a foot. So I'm going to have to probably do some adjustment on the window again, but I'm just going to kind of get it placed in here where I want it and get these details changed. So I'm going to change this to S-2, and this is going to be my eave strut detail. And it is at 1.5 inch equals a foot. And this one is going to be 3S-2. And the detail name, which I can actually change from right here, is my enlarged footing detail. And the scale on it, I can also change from here, is 1 inch equals a foot. And I'm going to say OK. So now I have all these details and I have their numbers in there. So the first thing I want to do is I want to go in here and I want to change this, and I can do it from my viewport. Change it to 2S-2. Then I'm going to go down here and I'm going to change this one to 3S-2. So now I have all the details marked correctly on here. I'm going to go back to my S1 sheet and check to see that I have everything named correctly. And I do not have this one named correctly because that is this detail here. So I need to go ahead and click in here and change this to be 2S-1. And then if I look here, I don't have this one in here, which is actually this section here. So it is going to be 3S-1. Okay, and then I'm going to look over here, and this is my enlarged footing detail, which was 3S-2. So again, I'm going to change this to be 3 S-2 and say okay. And I do want to go check this one just to make sure. And again, I don't have the right number on it. And it was my wall section, which was S-1. So now I've corrected all my detail markers. I now need to make sure that I've got the correct sections that I need. I have this, and I have it shown right here, so those are keyed together. I have this, which is shown with this, which is keyed together. If I look at this, this ties into my footing. This ties into my partial section, so that is tied in. That is tied in. That is also tied in here, and this is tied in here. So right now, everything is linked back together because that's important. Again, this is a step of directions, so they need to know where to go to see the different parts and pieces. I do like to kind of have these centered under my drawings. But it's not absolutely critical. As long as you have them on there, that is the key. One more item we need to do before we move on to the next part is you'll notice that we are missing a grid line here and a grid line here. Not necessarily the grid lines, but the grid bubbles. It's really important that we have those bubbles in there because this detail is specific to that location. If you look here, if I tried to grab this grid bubble, this box would have to be just huge and it wouldn't fit on my sheet. And here I could probably go ahead and enlarge my box and pick it up, but it's going to stick it way out to the side, so I do not like that. So here is a way to overcome that and yet get the same effect. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this box from here to here. Then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to stretch it out until I get that grid bubble in there. So now I have my grid bubble in there. Now this time I'm going to stretch it back up this way. Now I'm going to move that box down to here. And you see, now it looks as if my grid bubble is connected. And I'm basically going to do the same thing over here, other than I'm going to pull this completely out of here, and then I'm going to grab this and stretch it to where I have my grid bubble, stretch it back, stretch this back, and then move the box back. And again, now it looks like it's a continuous line even though it's not. We need to do the same thing on S2. We have the same situations here. So I'm going to copy this box, and then I'm going to stretch this until I have my grid bubble, which I do, and I stretch it just a little bit too far, so I'm going to stretch it back. Then I'm going to grab the box and I'm going to pull it back up here. Now I'm just going to move it back into place. And I'm good enough on my sheet, it's not a problem there. Same thing here, I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to bring it down here. I'm going to stretch this up. I have my grid bubble in there, then I'm going to stretch it up this way. And then I'm going to move that into place. So now I have my grid bubble in here. The reason for copying the exact box is to keep it in alignment. If I try to do a box that's a different dimension than my existing box and not just copy it, I probably will have a hard time aligning those grid lines. The last thing I want to do is make sure it looks like it's to the correct scale, which it does in those cases. And I'm going to go back to S1, and again, they look like they are the correct scale. So now we are ready to move on to the next part, which is going to be the footing, notes, and dimensions.